But there's a cluster of miracle stories during the period of America's founding. The first naval engagement, the Battle of Bunkerhill, this is the War for Independence. This started in 1775. The British Navy is ready to just go and teach these rebellious colonists a lesson. This ragtag Continental Army is no contest again for the British military power. But historians look at the fact that the British ships just so happened to have the wrong sized cannonballs for their cannon, and they go, well, what a coincidence that was. What a strange, unfortunate thing for the British that they had all these cannons ready to go, but they had the wrong sized ball for the cannon. So 2,300 British soldiers had to disembark and charge the hill where they were going to just bombard it from the sea and use their military naval advantage. And they lost twice as many soldiers and casualties to that in that battle than the colonists did. The British are coming for New York now. They've got 32,000 troops, 400 ships. You're imagining masts like tree trunks throughout New York Harbor. This is the biggest land invasion force in human history up until this point. And Washington said at this point, we are not, in men or in arms, prepared for it. But the rest of the quote says this: Providence will go on to afford us aid. The date is July 9, 1776. This is 5 days after what? July 9, 1776 is 5 days after July 4, 1776, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So new life is going to be breathed in to the faith and the resolve of these colonial soldiers. A copy of the Declaration of Independence is brought. Washington has it read to them, and it includes these words: with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You can see how that would be inspiring, right? Now, just to be clear, by the way, the Continental Army is not like the New Testament version of the army of God in the Old Testament. This is something Constantine got wrong in Christianity, so-called, in the 4th century. Church and military would be united. He was betraying the mission of the New Testament church. The New Testament times, God's covenant is with the church, believers everywhere of all nations. It is not anymore a covenant with a nation as it was in the time of ancient Israel. So just to make that clarification. However, when God says something will happen in prophecy, He's going to make it happen. And this is a just cause indeed. That grand old document, that Declaration of Independence, became the most world-famous articulation of the unalienable human rights of all mankind. So Washington hears that read, the soldiers hear that read, that Providence will afford us aid. 10,000 British troops are landed elsewhere to trap them between the sea and the 30,000 that are going to come this way. And an urgent need now is to retreat. There is nothing that they can do but retreat. Well, they have to retreat across the East River by night. And God just so happened, no, it was God's providence making the waters of the East River notably calm, the waters where the British ships are notably boisterous, and they made half of their troops were able to escape by night across the East River, ship after ship, quickly ferrying them across. But here's the real miracle. In the morning, there's still half of them left. You're going to get captured by the British from either side here. But a especially thick, notably thick fog rests upon the atmosphere that morning and shrouds their troops still as if it is night. So the British are waiting for the fog to lift, and by the time it lifted, every last soldier had made it across the river. George Washington was on the last boat across. A very dense fog seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments. I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards distance, said Ben Talmadge, Washington's chief of intelligence. The British Army never again in the rest of the war had a chance to capture the entire Continental Army all at once, or even half of the Continental Army all at once. And again, all odds were against the American colonists. How could the Americans possibly win when you've got so many British reinforcements on the way? Well, why did the Americans win in the turning point battle in the war, the Battle of Saratoga? Let's just hear Elihu Yale ask the question, to whom but the ruler of the winds shall we ascribe it, that the British reinforcements in the summer of 1777, reinforcement was delayed on the ocean 3 months by contrary winds until it was too late. The ruler of the winds. Speaking of God's providence once again, preventing the British reinforcements from being able to come, which would have totally overwhelmed the Continental Army. George Washington called it a signal stroke of providence. And this was the turning point in the war because the French saw, wow, the British really aren't making much headway there. Maybe we should get involved too and help finish them off. So the French became allies with the United States for a period of time at the end of the war to really tip the scales and turn the tide of that war against the British. The final act in defeat at the Battle of Cowpens and the pursuit of the Americans that followed is the key. The Americans won in the battle, then retreated. Now the retreat is the interesting part. What happened? General Cornwallis of the British is pursuing the Continental Army after the battle is over. And they're some distance behind, perhaps 2 hours behind. So the Americans come to a river. Now crossing the river with your whole brigade is going to be a challenge. They get across, the British are still far enough back, we made it across the river. Well, right after the Americans cross the river, a sudden storm arises again that causes the waters to rise and the British to have a substantial delay when they get to that same river to cross it. So now the Americans get to another river. This one's called the Dan River. The first one was the Catawba River. Here they are to the next river. The Americans get across again, and another flash flood blocks the British pursuit and slows them markedly down. British Commander Henry Clinton said, here, speaking of at the Dan River, the Royal Army was again stopped by a sudden rise of the waters, which had only just fallen almost miraculously to let the enemy over. Even the enemy acknowledges, boy, it seems like they're getting some miracles on their behalf, on their side. So George Washington at the end of the war was able to conclude and summarize with this: we have abundant reasons to thank Providence for its many favorable interpositions in our behalf. It has at times been my only dependence, for all other resources seemed to have failed us. That was March of 1781 at the end of the war.